So the other question is betting on the Super Bowl. I'll ask you guys again. Did either of you, as LDS, did you ever bet on the Super Bowl?
No,
never. You
No
didn't.
gambling.
No, and no gambling. And that's what we're going to talk about. This is a great article by Jana Reese where it says
it's
the
probably
church.
because I didn't know where to go to place my bets.
Well, and isn't this interesting? I had this thought because back in the day to bet, you had to go somewhere, right? Some kind of seedy sports track or some kind of scary back room. I don't know how to do it. It's funny that the church talked about the evils of gambling long ago when it was hard to gamble unless you knew how to do that. Gambling's on your phone now. I think a 5-year-old could do it, and they rarely mention it, as we'll see in this article. It's kind of interesting. So Jana Reese says the church is clear. It's a no-no, but odds are that it's a growing number of members disagree, and leave it to Jana Reese to get to the bottom of this whole thing. She says Utah is not one of the 38 states that now permit some form of legal sports betting. In fact, the historically majority LDS state has no forms of legal gambling, not even the lottery, which explains why so many people drive across the border, right? Have you guys ever done that to get a lottery ticket?
No, I've never done that because I could just go across the street to the local grocery store.
That's true. And you don't have to pay tithing on gambling or lottery or anything like that. So
You mean if I won the lotto, I don't have to pay tithing on it?
No, they won't accept tithing on ill-gotten gain. There's a whole list. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
It suddenly sounds more appealing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It does sound more appealing. So, and of course, this is largely attributed to the deep and long-standing influence of the LDS church, right? But even though the Mormons, the LDS, are not the majority in Utah, they still have, these rules on the books. They're not going to have gambling. I love these pictures. They're just so funny.
So 10% more appealing.
Do you remember this episode over here that I have
Absolutely.
a picture of? I know. I knew you would. Do you remember this from the Twilight Zone bill at all? Yeah, it's the story of an elderly couple that go on a trip. They've waited for it for so long, and the man just gets very attracted to a slot machine. He just can't leave it alone.
And remember at the beginning, this is Las Vegas,
circa
1960. And this guy, he remember, super self-righteous. He could be a Mormon.
Yeah, he could be.
And he's not going to play the things. He doesn't even want his wife to play him. But then it's like she finds a quarter or something. And is it okay with this? And then it starts happening. He starts getting the fever. And before you know it, this slot machine is showing up in his motel room upstairs and calling his name.
Yeah, it's walking around calling him. I mean, I'm sure it's metaphorical and symbolic, but yeah, I watched that as a kid, and my parents were huge anti-gambling people. I don't know why. None of us gambled. We didn't know anybody that did, but we were like, take note of that. I'm like, okay, I don't want a slot machine to come after me. So the only time I don't gamble very much, I had a boyfriend who was headed to the MTC. We were driving together from California to Utah. We stopped in Vegas. He had his mission money with him that he'd gotten, at the farewell, people hand you money. You're like, son, here's some, we gambled it. It was great. We doubled his money for his mission. It was awesome. That's pretty much my only successful gambling story. So I know you both look kind of incredulous, but it's true.
Would you like to tell us some of your unsuccessful gambling stories?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to. No, I think I've only gone to Vegas like 3 times and tried it, but that was a funny one. That was just a really interesting one. Okay, let's see. And he was older, by the way, if you're asking why you can't gamble till you're 21. He wasn't going on his mission until he was a little bit older. Otherwise, my story seems weird. So, all right, let's go to the next slide. Here we go. The church has had a consistent, even unequivocal policy against gambling. Its website states, here we go, gambling is motivated by a desire to get something for nothing. This desire is spiritually destructive. It leads participants away from the Savior's teachings of love and service and toward the selfishness of the adversary. It undermines the virtues of work and thrift and the desire to give honest effort in what we do. So something for nothing. The policy then quickly jumps to the worst case scenario, saying that those who gamble waste money, sacrifice their own honor, and lose the respect of friends and family. Deceived and addicted, they often gamble with funds they should use for other purposes, like missions. Such as meeting the basic needs of their family. Gamblers sometimes become so enslaved and so desperate to pay gambling debts that they turn to stealing, giving up their own good name. And again, I think this is kind of an old-timey view of it. I mean, I remember that there was a lot of emphasis on gambling when I was growing up, which is weird because no one really gambled or knew anyone that gambled. Yeah. I remember one time my little sister snuck a mini deck of face cards. I think she won it in a bubble gum machine under her pillow. And my parents found it, and it was like they had discovered she was a prostitute. I'm not kidding. The level of, upsetness, it was really interesting, but I don't really see that so much today. And I think we'll see that Jana says the same thing.
And to put the pin on that, okay, is that one of the reasons, okay, Mormons are not supposed to use face cards.
Right.
I don't know when the last time I heard it was, but, you know, it's in the teachings. It's Joseph Fielding Smith. It's Bruce R. McConkie. It's classic Mormonism. When I joined the church, you're not supposed to use face cards. That's why we used rook cards at my friend's house every Friday night for the party, right? Mormons use rook cards, not face cards, because there's something about those faces that the devil really likes that are going to take you down. And so that's why we're not supposed to use face cards, because the reason, sometimes they'll say, oh, it's satanic, but usually what you hear is a little bit different. It's usually, well, these are the tools of gambling. So if you use face cards, you're going to be led down that primrose path to the gambling den.
No, that's it. No, I couldn't really have any cards with numbers on them. I could have pictures, but not numbers. I was the only freshman in my dorm who didn't know how to play any of the games that everybody else was, you know, war and all the fun card games. I was never allowed anything like that. So, but according to Jana, things are sort of changing. So in 2016, 14, and I didn't write which way it was. So yeah, I'm going to have to go back. Okay. 14% of LDS said it was morally acceptable to gamble. But by 2023, 19% are saying it's okay. There's probably not anything wrong with it. Morally wrong in 2016, they said 56% said, yep, it's completely morally wrong. So more than half. 2023, less than half, 44% say that there's something wrong with it and not a moral issue at all, which I think is interesting. 30% in 2016 said, yeah, it's not really a moral issue. But in 2023, 37%, even more, felt that's not really a moral issue. So I think things are definitely changing. And Jana suggests one possible reason of this is that it's a clear sign of secularization. As U.S. society becomes more accepting of gambling and less tied to religious leaders, old school condemnations of it, Latter-day Saints are affected by this too. Cohort replacement. Have you ever heard this phrase? I think this is great, which is a nice way of pointing to the presence of younger people in surveys as older people die, is also a factor. So that generation, like my parents who were so abhorrent of gambling, they've passed on. And the younger generation, like me or younger, or like, I don't really see what's wrong with it. It's not really a problem that I've experienced or know anybody that has experienced. But again, the rise of the prevalence of it. You can get on your phone and you can place a bet, you know, they will take your credit card.
What apps do you recommend for that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just know I've heard tell. Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll become a raging online gambler between now and next Monday, and I'll report back. How about that?
That would be great. But by the way, who would access today? I know in the late 70s, I joined the church, early 80s. I'm reading, you know, Joseph Fielding Smith. I'm reading about the playing cards, and I'm reading Bruce R. McConkie. Who today, general authority wise, is even talking about this issue? Anybody? Have they mentioned it for decades?
No, and that's what let's see, Jana says, sorry to be a literal spoilport, but section 38.8.17 of the church's general handbook still says the opposition, including sports betting and government sponsored lotteries. So yes, it's in the handbook, but you're absolutely right, RFM, exactly. As a general conference topic, the high points of gambling or betting being mentioned was in the 40s and the 50s. And again, in the 90s. Isn't that interesting? That corresponds well to times when gambling was in the news. In the mid-century period, because of a string of gambling scandals, and in the 1990s and early 2000s, because of the growing trend of states trying to legalize, like lotteries and riverboat casinos. So they were trying to make a push. Don't let this happen in my town. Then church President Gordon B. Hinckley, in particular, hammered home this concern, including in a hard-hitting 2005 conference talk in the men's priesthood session, bemoaning the growing proliferation of various kinds of gambling. Hinckley reiterated the dangers of getting involved in it in any way, however innocuous. So in the 90s and 2000s, gambling was mentioned 42 times in general conference. In the 2010s and into the 20s, it has come up 6 times. So you're absolutely right. But don't you think that's interesting? Because the availability is there. It's completely there, but they don't mention it at all.
As the availability has increased and probably the gambling numbers have increased among Mormons, the warnings have dropped off.
Yep, that's it, which is funny. And so then she says, which is very interesting, given that reality, it's possible that some younger members of the church don't even know about the church's longstanding opposition to gambling or whether something like betting on the Super Bowl would even count, which is why you have that survey where they say, they didn't grow up like I did or like the rest of us did. So anyway, very interesting. I thought sports betting and the Super Bowl. And I had to bring up, when I was growing up, my parents somehow got the idea, and other parents like them, that the stock market was gambling. I know some people have pushed back on me when I've mentioned this before, but this is an absolute reality. The stock market, investing your money, is a form of gambling. I'm talking the 70s.
So my grandmother told my granddad back in the 1920s before the market collapsed.
Yeah, little did they know that their own church would someday be worth $1 trillion or whatever it's headed for. And then I also had the thought that prosperity gospel, which is sort of tithing, is a kind of gambling. You're putting money into something that, is there a return? Do you convince yourself there's a return? Is it an eternal reward later? It's certainly not as assured as having your money with you. So I don't know, just some thoughts. Any final thoughts on that? And then we'll go on to, I think Bill has something next, or maybe I do. I don't know.
What you're pointing out, that bottom one there isn't paying tithing in order to have a shot at salvation, which hinges on your faith being truthfully the one true church on the earth among a million religions. Isn't that sort of it seems like a form of gambling?
That's what I think. I don't know. I feel that way for sure, depending on how it's presented. But yeah.
By the way, remember Sister Wendy Nelson, the prophet's wife? She told that story. She brought that story back. Who the heck was it? I can't remember. You tell me who that general authority was. Was it Cannon? Was it George Q?
Oh, who paid tithing on his, it was.
Who said in a largely unknown statement, except for the fact that Wendy resurrected it, that not only did he pay tithing on what he got, one time he did this thing where he says, I'm only making X amount of money this year. I want to make twice as much money next year. So I'm going to preemptively at the beginning of the year pay twice as much tithing as I did last year. In other words, I'm going to pay prospectively the tithing on the money I want to earn this year. And God blessed me, and I sure earned that double the amount. So that's all you have to do. Decide how much money you want to make, and then tithe it at the beginning of the year, and you'll make that money.
Yep.
As crazy as that sounds, and as prone to abuse as that might be, Wendy Nelson brought that forward again recently. And the only thing that makes it more poignant is that she's talking on behalf of a church that has over $200 billion in their investment account. They have over $200 billion. And she's encouraging Latter-day Saints to pay twice their tithing on the hope that they'll make twice the income.
Yeah, if that's not gambling, I don't know what is, right? And then you have the sunk cost. You keep putting it in. You've put so much in. You can't not do it anymore. Yeah, it's abusive.